what's going on out there, Global Hack Week, folks? I'm really excited to be presenting a great workshop that's about to come up. My name is Rosendo from MLH. You may know me from my past hits like Global Hack Week, Social Good Week, and also Global Hack Week AI ML. Let me know how everyone's feeling out there. Let me know where you're joining us from. Let me know if you're excited about Global Hack Week. Drop it in the chat and make sure that you have your questions, comments, and concerns listed on the chat as well, because we're going to be definitely talking about them during the workshop itself. Without any further ado, I want to introduce someone named Ben Matthews. He is a director of engineering out at Stack Overflow. So we're going to just jump right into it and get the workshop on starting to use web APIs started. So without any further ado, let's give a warm round of applause and a warm welcome to Ben Matthews. What's going on, Ben? And let me just unmute your mic here. Actually, you've got to unmute your mic. There you go.
Apologies. Of course, every
No
meeting's
worries.
going to have a mute problem.
Uh-huh.
Thank you very much, everyone, for having me. It's very nice to speak with you. As Rosendo said, my name is Ben Matthews, and I'm a director of engineering at Stack Overflow. And I've spent almost 20 years now developing technologies, big and small. And now I'm lucky enough to do it for one of the largest technology platforms on the internet. And I started out just as actually a QA in an engineering department, just being in working quality assurance, working through platforms to make sure that they're stable. And then I got to move to a developer. And then I even got to move into working with larger organizations in multiple teams. And there's a lot of things I learned on the way that I wish I knew my first day as a developer that I'm hoping to share with you all. Hopefully we can help that learning curve out to help you all on your technology platform path to becoming technologists. So first, some background. Let's get this out of the way for anyone, especially if you're new to development. Development is intimidating, especially to new folks. That is a completely natural thing to have. And whether it's a new language or a new platform or a new process, if you're looking for someone that's developed before and working with them to help you through that, it's very obscure when you see like these crazy characters on the screen. They're in a random format. They look different from anything we've seen before. And I want to show an example of this as like the very first piece of code I saw, a little bit more modernized version of it. But this is the first piece of code I ever saw when I was learning to be a developer. Now, this is supposed to be a relatively simple piece of code, but it's in assembly. And by the way, I do not recommend anyone to start their first language in assembly. It can be very intimidating, even more so. But like I saw this in front of me and there was like a whole bunch of confusions and weird feelings, but you might be able to guess what it does, even if you've never seen assembly before, just based on this line. It says hello world. This is a common opening program people use to kind of ease you in to a new language. And my computer science professor in high school showed me this, and it was supposed to make us feel comfortable, but it really didn't have that effect. It didn't feel that comfortable at all because honestly, this line wasn't even what I was really paying attention to. I was ignoring the hello world part. What the heck was all that? That's what I was trying to figure out. This might as well have been a completely different language. It could have been Klingon, and I would have no idea what it meant. Like, where do you even begin in tackling all that stuff? And so it's an extremely daunting task to have this in front of you. And you're like, wait, what am I even doing with this? Where do I even start? Am I supposed to understand? What do I not understand? So this has kind of led me into things I wish I knew. Number one is like, you can't let weird things scare you off. As you work in this industry and as you keep going forward, you're going to see a lot of things that look like gibberish, don't make sense, or completely the opposite of way you think about things. And that can be in code. It can be in workflows. It could also be in how people work together. And this is entirely normal. In fact, I would say it's absolutely healthy that sometimes you're like, wait a minute, I'm confused. But how you react to that is what's important. Because if you stick with it and you keep going through things, it starts to get familiar. And eventually your brain automatically starts adding these things in so you understand what it does and you can understand what it's doing. And naturally, it kind of becomes a fluent language to you. And now I just understand it when I look at it. It wasn't weird anymore. And I got comfortable with it. And I even kind of got dependent on this mindset. I thought this was normal, how I should always be looking at code. And at this point, I was far too new to do anything super fancy. But this tool set became my normal. And then eventually I met my next language and it started all over again. And so what just happened? Like, where's my message length controls? How am I moving values around now? And honestly, I mean, in absolute terms, this is far more welcoming, far easier to understand, a little bit of a learning curve. But even despite coming from assembly, this felt weird. And I had to learn again. I had to go through that natural feeling of learning a new paradigm. And it's going to happen again and again with different languages all the time that I've gone through. It's a learning experience over and over and over. And you're going to see in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different languages. And you're going to start feeling a natural resistance. But then it becomes a tool. It's a sign that you need to change gears and start learning. And this was just like a natural, I think this was my natural evolution of things I started to see of where I did Hello World. I think this is the order. And each time I had to take a step back and be like, okay, this is a little weird. Let me just kind of reassess things. And now all of these become natural. So you're going to have many, many, many tools in your tool belt the longer you stick around. Each of these is going to be a learning experience. Now you can go out and find them, but in an industry like ours, they're coming your way whether you like it or not. With how often things change, you're going to see new paradigms, new technologies, new ways of using old technologies. And every time you're going to get a little more perspective and you're going to discover things that fit for you. And that's a good thing to understand. There's things that fit for you and things that fit for other people. And that's going to change from person to person. And that's all right. Anyone that advocates for a universal one right way to do things, with perhaps very few exceptions, is probably trying to sell you something. So, regardless of what people on Twitter, TikTok, or social media may scream, there are usually several right ways to do something. Now, to level set this, as I was saying, for some direct tasks, you have only a little wiggle room. There's some things that have been through the ringer and really shown to be successful, and you should explore other options. But sometimes things are settled, but in a lot of ways, it's really kind of up to you to do things that you like to do. And don't let someone tell you it's wrong just because they don't like your personal approach. Now, like I said, there's going to be pros and cons, right or wrong ways to do things, but especially for new folks that are trying to get into development, I want to give a little example. So this is an example of some things we actually tackle from time to time on large, big applications. And even Stack Overflow and other companies, we have to make this choice between which is better. And given these two blocks of code, let's just say for argument's sake, the one on the left runs 20% faster. But it has some assembly in it. It could be a little bit harder to understand. And we would never write a function to just do addition because we already have the addition operator. We don't need to write a function for it. But for example here, which one is better? Now, the answer you're going to hear a lot all the time when you see all of these examples, the answer is it depends what you're going to do. And as you go along in your code and your career, that's going to be your answer 90% of the time when people ask you what to do. It depends. You need to ask. So even if the one on the left is better, let's say better as in faster, if it's in like a mission critical function, something that's called millions and millions of times today, maybe we need to sacrifice a little bit of readability so we can have speed, or are we constrained with some of our resources in computing? Then it becomes a good option. But honestly, most of the time, option 2 is going to be a way to go because it's easier to read, no matter how big a function is. If it's 1,000 lines or 3 lines, someday that code is going to have to be maintained. And more often than not by the person that wrote it. So it's really going to be more about working with people, which is the number 3 thing I wish I knew. That a lot of the complexity around development is working with other people, which is why option 2 would be so popular and kind of a common way to go. So there was a long period where this was not the case. Like within the last couple decades, like software development really, really changed more and more so in terms of working with people. Like back when I was really getting started, to date myself, back when dinosaurs were walking around, we were all in cubicles and we typed away in a cubicle for 8 hours a day in a huge code base. And most of the social things around development was just who get to check out which file, who had which one when to put it back in the repository. And it was just rinse, repeat. And then eventually we learned that working with people, sharing ideas and adding some social aspects to it became a whole lot better in the software development process. Because no matter how you cut it, A lot of what development is a creative exercise. You're finding solutions to solve problems. And code is just one tool in that tool belt a lot of the time. Like, do we use big solutions, something small? Do we write something brand new? Is there something already out there that we've already written that we could do? These are normal questions to ask. So, especially, are we approaching the problem completely wrong? And do we need to look at other alternatives? And that one actually happens a lot. And I want to give an example of that of conversations I've actually had kind of boiled down. So it was between me when I was a developer and a designer. A designer came to me and said we had to have custom login screens for each user. Now, if you've ever had to build an auth system, you usually have one universal login screen that everyone shares. So when someone says something that's a little out there, I usually have the same response. I go, "Well, that's an interesting idea. How would it help?" And that's when we really started to dig into the problem, the creative exercise of how we're solving a problem. What the designer really wanted, she wanted to have a more welcoming, contextual experience to folks. She wanted people to feel like this login page was mine. So I said, okay, now I got it. So what can we do to make that a little contextual without having to write, thousands and thousands of login screens for all of our users? And we can do it like based on their API. And that's when the ideas started rolling. Like, we can have state flags or local college football teams, like, and just based on their location to make it feel like it belongs to them. I'm like, sure, you got it. And that is the exercise that happens a lot in development, not actual coding, but sometimes figuring out and working with people on what the options are and what we can code. So here's another quick example that I had with a product manager who says that they want to prioritize this new fancy feature they have over fixing our broken login page. And that set off some alarm bells. So, of course, I said, well, that's an interesting idea. But the login page is a crucial function. Is it really less important? And they said that we've committed to a deadline. We have to make fancy feature by this point, or else we're not going to hit our numbers, which, something that comes up a lot is how we're going to resource things. And I said, without fixes to the login page, we're open to a data breach and we probably wouldn't hit our numbers anyway. So how can we explore how to do both? So we deprioritize less fancy feature. We'll pick that up later. And I said, great, sounds good. So, it's always this back and forth of working with people. And I can't tell you how many times I've had these, that's an interesting idea conversation, because you always want to be open to what other people want to do and what they want to build. And you're there to help facilitate that. So keeping that open mind, and sometimes those weird things are ideas, not just code. And you have to be open to those, because working with others is how we learn. Working with others is how we can learn how others work and how we can work better. Which brings me to number 4 thing, which I wish I knew. There are endless resources to use and learn out there. They're like, not to be like an old curmudgeon again, but way back when, we didn't have the free tools, the free hosting, the free like books or courses. This is an amazing time to get into development. We have YouTube, GitHub, free or really cheap, at least, tools, free libraries. And I encourage you all, use them. Figure out which ones you love, which one is right for you, and then try the next one, and then the next one, and just keep that going. Because there's free educational sites and videos, and in the theme of this week, there are tools and APIs that are free for you to try to build whatever you'd like. And of course, like Stack Overflow, there's dev communities that keep growing that you can be a part of, where you can learn and mentor. And we encourage people to lean on that social aspect. Work with the other people in your group or in your circle to try to get better and better at what you do. Which brings me to introduce our challenge for this week, is that I want you to start using APIs, and specifically the Stack Overflow API. Let's learn how to grab data from the web and power up your applications. There's so much data out there, so much that's free. And at Stack Overflow, we have a big commitment to an open and transparent flow of data. We even give away all of our data on a quarterly basis, all non-private data, that is. So this open API that you can use right here is just api.stackexchange.com. And here are just a couple of examples of just links you can hit that'll return a JSON response that you can use in any of your applications. So right here is just like if you wanted to see all of the questions on Stack Overflow, would be that first link. If you can look at all of the answers on Stack Overflow, thank you for dropping that link. And it has docs and everything on how you can use it, even some examples or some tools to test the API responses. But just to help things move along even quicker, because like I said, I know it can be intimidating. Um, I also have a code repository out there, if someone could share that link too, of demos for a couple of popular languages that you could use to actually see us calling the API and using that there. Now, to be clear, it's very simple. It's nothing fancy, but it's there to get you started. So I just want to give a couple of examples of this code so you can see what it's doing and kind of the workflows that we've gone through. So hopefully everyone can read that okay. But here's just the example in C# of what a lot of these are doing. And that in here, we actually just create a way for us to grab code from an HTTP endpoint with our client handler. Another thing to note, Stack Overflow does automatically compress all of its API responses. So for some languages, you'll have to tell it that you want to decompress the response. So there, like we could see that we actually say what API URL we want to hit. In this case, in these examples, we're actually trying to get a list of all of the users sorted by their reputation. And this will return those lists from the people who have the highest reputation to the least. So we actually call it, we wanted to deserialize that JSON, put it into our response, and then all we do is just write it to the console. We grab the first user from the list, and we write that user's display name and reputation to the console. So this is just a good way if you wanted to work within C# and .NET, a good way to get going. A little one that might be more popular is here in JavaScript. Here's another example that's out there that you could see. Just an example of grabbing those same high rep users in a function here. Again, we just say what the API endpoint is. We make the call, get the data, and here we map those data items into a user response object, grab the first one, and then we put in the console and an element on the example page of what their display name and reputation. Just things like that. And then here's the last one. We have an example in Python. This was, since my Python is very, very rusty, a friend of mine named Sean Frame wrote this. So thank you very much, Sean. And this actually uses Stack Overflow API library. He has some instructions on how to have it installed through pip and everything. It's all linked within the documentation on the repository. But this actually uses that library where we set, and here we're actually getting all the questions within a certain date from the first of the year until now. And this call will give you all of the questions that have happened in 2023. So go to that API, the documentation endpoint, take a look at that. There's a whole lot of examples. But here are the challenges for each of the days I'd love for you all to participate in. And we're always here to help. Feel free to reach out with questions. Day one, let's just review the documentation and take one of those examples, whichever one you're more comfortable with, and just have it working on your local machine. Just be able to hit that endpoint. That endpoint is open, free to anyone, and you can use it however you like. And then on day two, let's actually pull an endpoint based on what you see in the docs and actually work on displaying it in an output. Do we want to show graphs? Do we want to show a list of users in a data table? However you want to go about it. But let's actually take that data and actually do something meaningful with it. Display it to the user and see what they can do with it. And then the last day, we want to make it a little more complex. Pull one or more complex queries from Stack Overflow's API and use them to show something interesting. But remember, this is a creative exercise like all development. There are no bad ideas. Whatever you think would be fun. And by complex query, I mean that could be pulling data from two different endpoints or two different data sets and merging them, or making one call with a lot of different data objects in it and pull that back and then showing it. It's totally up to you, but stretch those muscles and how you can grab a whole bunch of different types of data and use it differently. So with that, good luck. I just want to remind folks again that to keep stretching those muscles, keep exploring these things. If you do need help, feel free to reach out. I'm sure the wonderful people here at MLH, or if you want to hit me up on Twitter, I'm happy to help you along in your path. We love working with new technologists at Stack Overflow. And you all are the next generation, the future of technologists here that are going to keep building awesome and great things. And so we really look forward to seeing that. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions. All right, so here's one. What are some strategies for optimizing performance when using web APIs? That's a great question. And not to lean back on what I said before, but it depends. um, I mean, one of the things that a lot of people get stuck with, especially if we're calling APIs from the front, is that you don't want those to be blocking calls. Like if you're especially using JavaScript, to actually make sure that you can call them asynchronously or load them in a way that other things can keep working, especially if you're pulling in large data sets or manipulating large data sets. That can be a very long and expensive operation. So that's always one thing to look for. Have things run in parallel. Don't let one big operation block other operations. In terms of that, anything else, like connection wise, there's a lot of documentation on there on how to access it, on whether it's compressed, especially if you're writing your own web API in the future, and how you can control the size and speed of that. It's a cool new world out there. A whole lot of stuff to dig into. Which is, yeah, I'll be happy to share that. I can work with Rosendo after to see if we can get a copy of the slides for you all. See here. I would say Python is the best language for rapid development, but never specialized. You know what, I would agree with you. I think Python is a fantastic language. I was working with some of the professors at the university. I got my computer science degree, and they were looking for a new beginner language. And though Python isn't something I use so much anymore, it's extremely welcoming, extremely easy to understand. There's a whole lot of libraries and support around it. The community around Python, I think that's one of our biggest communities on Stack Overflow. It's a great place to get started, and it lowers that intimidation factor. So for those that are trying to get into development, and especially something that they can really sink their teeth into, I think Python is a great way to start. For those that don't have any experience in listed languages, any of the listed languages above, do you have advice on how to go with this challenge? Um, so the one good thing about the API is that it is just an open endpoint, and almost all languages that you'll tackle now have a way to reach out to the web and pull data. So I would look into HTTP calls for whichever language you do enjoy the most, and hopefully these could be a good example. Probably the most popular language on that list I had would be on JavaScript. So if you did want to have something, and of course I recommend Python, or you could try to learn something new. Take this opportunity to explore those other languages. That's what I would recommend. Just make this an opportunity to learn and grow. I just started learning the API concept. How can I do better in this field? Is it good for beginners? I would say so, especially now with how the internet is really becoming interconnected more and more. It already was for a long time, and now it's growing more and more as we work with other platforms and ways to develop new tools. And the API is just an example of that, of how we can grab data or even send data to get responses and analytics around our information. I would think it's very good for beginners to start flexing those muscles now. And like a lot of things of how to just get better at it is just practice. And I would also say find what you enjoy. There's dozens and dozens of different ways to do dozens and dozens of different things. And no one is inherently better than the other. Just keep trying it. Find what's right for you, what feels comfortable, lean into it, and just keep having fun. There's so many tools and so much information out there. Just keep playing with it until you learn what's right for you. The API, it is read only. Yes, the open version for the web is read only. That is correct. Can I use with Java? Of course. Java has great tools to reach out to the web and has and make HTTP calls, and it would pull the JSON back in the exact same way. And there's dozens of examples out there that could show you how to do it. Yeah, I encourage you to go give it a try. And we could even, I think there's even a very popular question on Stack Overflow with how to do this with Java. Flash refresh. Which API framework is better? I'm not gonna I'm not gonna get into this game. Both whatever framework you enjoy, go with it. I will say I'm more familiar with Flask than I am with any other. That's one I've used a lot with as far as a Python framework. Um, but as far as which one is better, that totally depends on what you're trying to accomplish and what you like to work with. That's really what's going to determine the right answer. What's the other way to collect data to build an API other than web scraping for the data? I want to make sure I understand your question. To build an API, if you're talking about populating a database that you would respond with for your API, um, it really just depends on what you're trying to do. Again, if you're trying to like deliver information around that you've collected through your website or through another application, just having shared databases there is a great way, or even putting the API in that web project. If you're trying to take information from a lot of different places, combine it and make your own database and serve that, that's a very popular way to go. A lot of places have their own APIs that you can grab. And it's a very common thing for a lot of people to create value for others by grabbing a bunch of open data repositories, doing some analysis and combining that data together. You have like a curated data set that other people can use and build better applications. That's a very popular and valuable thing that we rely on. I am just an entry level dev, but what does the path look like to be director of engineering? A crooked one. Not to go so much on myself, but I started as a QA engineer, just testing out applications, and then I've always had a love for programming, and even to this day, I still program every day. I don't work on the Stack Overflow code base. Lucky for them and for you all, they don't let me push code anymore. But I still code every day on personal projects and everything. And it's that passion and curiosity that just kept growing as I was a developer coding every day for my job until I became a manager that scratched a different itch. I think a lot of developers just really enjoy building things and solving problems. And moving into a manager or director role, I'm solving different problems, but it's still a creative exercise of how do I get teams to work together better? How do I get problems out of the way? Sometimes using code, sometimes not. So, and my passion really became working with people. I do like working with people. I love code, but I think mentoring, growing folks, trying to find what they're passionate about and trying to complement that is something I really enjoy, and that's why this suited me very well. How are APIs designed internally? Interesting question. A lot of different ways to go about it. I could say for internal APIs, it's really popular to have sort of, for lack of a better term, maybe even like standards or some consistency between the APIs. So for what we do in Stack, we have a whole bunch of internal APIs built that we use, and we try to keep them relatively consistent so people know how to interact with them and how to use them. And you'll see this in a lot of organizations that we want to give people this balance of flexibility to solve problems the way they want to solve them, but also to make sure that we're not going off the rails too much and it stays familiar for everyone that might want to work with it. So that's how, like, from a design point of view, those are usually the things we take into account. The good news is, especially if it's an internal API, there's a bunch of security concerns there that you have a lot of control over. If it's a public API that you need to keep secure, that raises a lot of questions and challenges to make sure that people can't access data they're not supposed to get to. If it's firewalled off and only internal, those are other considerations that we can take, that it's just for us and we know who can access the data, and you have a different mindset of how to make sure things are secure and permissions are there. But that's a great question in how you design APIs for the public versus internally. It almost does kind of have two different creative challenges on how you tackle it. How has Stack Overflow evolved over the years with the exponentially increasing amount of developers? Um, a lot. I've been at Stack for almost 4 years now, coming up on four. And so, like most people at Stack, I was a user long before I was an employee there. So I think that's one of the things that has helped Stack Overflow evolve. And that when we're talking about products to build or how we can interact with our community, we were in that community, part of that community, still are part of that community, and contributing and consuming information from it long before we worked there. And I think that has really helped power us in how our platform has evolved. And that we don't like building things that we wouldn't want to use a lot of the time. And depending on our audience, we just want to make sure that everything we do is improving our community. That's kind of number one. We are community focused first and foremost. We want to keep empowering our community to grow and improve the features that they can use. And with the increasing amount of developers, how that's grown, another director here at Stack Overflow, her name is Roberta Abracalo. She had a great interview with Scott Hanselman around the architecture of Stack Overflow and how scale is very important to us, but we do it in a way where we have a very minimal amount of servers. We make sure that we're monitoring them well. We have low resource usage, so we can handle like more users coming in all the time with not necessarily throwing more hardware constantly at the problem, as opposed to how we architect things and making sure it can scale. That's what's actually been most impressive to me at Stack Overflow, and seeing these very smart, dedicated people scaling the application without throwing more and more hardware at it all the time as their traffic continues to grow. I mean, it's sometimes a tough problem, but it's a very exciting one. It's a great problem to have, that more people are trying to get into the industry and solve more and more problems. If I want to create an API as a beginner, what is the way to create an API? I mean, there's a whole lot of ways to go about that. If you have a language that you're most familiar with, there's probably a bunch of great workflows out there. I would first say, like, if you want to figure out what you want to deliver, what do you want your API to do to deliver value to the team or audience that you want to create, and then just you would have to find a way to store that information, and then the API is a way to deliver that information. So there's a lot of good ways to go about that. I think there's a lot of examples that you could follow as well to try to see what fits best for you. But yeah, like a lot of these things, just go out and try. Fall down, fail, try again, and like till something clicks. And once you kind of get that moment of like, oh wow, this is really cool, just lean into that and do it some more, and to get that better understanding. How would I define API in a short sentence? Well, I mean, the definition of API is an application programming interface. But like with a lot of nomenclature, it can mean a lot of things, but it's basically a way for your application to give and receive information from the outside world, and whether it's a small controlled audience or the whole world. That's what an API would do. So for instance, at Stack Overflow, our APIs are a way for you to hit certain endpoints and get large amounts of information, things that you can mostly get on the web anyway. If you wanted to look at certain users or look for certain questions, you could go to the website and find that. But some of them you want to do very quickly or in large bulks. So we provide these addresses that you can go to, get large amounts of information, and then use them to enhance your own application or to do some sort of data analysis. Hopefully that's the answer you were looking for. Hopefully I that's what you were hoping to hear. I enjoyed the talk. I haven't been to too many programming related events, but I enjoyed this start. A question I have is, how and where can developers reach out to get mentors or creative feedback on how they can improve their coding skills? That's a great question. There's like Stack Overflow is all about building the community. And I think Stack Overflow is a great place, especially now that we have a what we call collectives, which are places where people can come to share ideas around certain technologies. So it's a set of questions and answers that you can go to. But even outside of that, it might be a little old fashioned. I still like going to meetups and meeting people face to face on what they want to do. If you have any local meetups or even digital ones, a lot of virtual meetups are still out there. Reach out to people, hear their talks, ask questions. It's a great way to just build these relationships. I also think the open source community right now is extremely fantastic. Like all things, there's good and bad, but I think if you find like a project that you want to help on or submit PRs to, there's a lot of great places where people love to work with each other and some beginners that'll get feedback on their PRs or field questions on how they could do better. There's a lot of great communities around this. So just try to find the one that's right for you. Just keep trying it and see which clicks. I've used some APIs earlier, but I think there is a different way to fetch the data from each API, which makes it difficult for me to understand. How to overcome this? I mean, isn't there a common way to use an API? Sadly, no, not 100%. Everyone can write their APIs to give and receive data in whatever way they think works best for their application. So I can totally understand how that could be confusing to someone trying to uh, like learn how they work or how to use them better. And I know that's frustrating. And usually you might have to look at some documentation and some examples on how to do it right. I would say try to find one that you think is kind of easy for you that is working, and then try to lean into that to understand like what's the ins and outs of what it's doing there, and then try to go wider to some other APIs. But yeah, this might be a little bit of a specific challenge. If it's in terms of how to actually hit the endpoint, that should be relatively universal with maybe some security features or some tokens that you have to do to access the API. But other than that, that should be pretty standard. In terms of grabbing the data and manipulating it, that's where it can be very different from place to place that you go to. And I know that can be frustrating. It's one of those hills to get over, but I encourage you to ask questions and reach out to other people in the community. There's always people out there happy to help. What are some specifics you can share about the data that the API contains? Stack Exchange specifically. Uh, so in terms of like some of the responses that come back from the API, it depends on which endpoint you hit. Like for instance, if you are hitting the questions endpoint, you can choose like beginning date, end date. You can choose what tags you want related to the questions, and it can send those back to you in a JSON format that are usually pretty easily consumable by most popular languages. And some of those frameworks, some of those endpoints will have different sets of data, different pieces of data, but you should be able to also just read it in your browser to see what's in there and what they do. I'm trying to remember the first part of the question. I want to make sure I answer everything. What are some specifics you can share? It's like there'll be like question title, who the asker is. It'll share the number of upvotes. If there's an answer, there's a lot of cool stuff that it can bring back. Pretty much anything that you see on the web page will be in that API. So not all the data that we may use, but anything that's visible on like the question page when you're reading a question, using the question endpoint as an example, you should be able to get back in the API.
Okay. It looks like we are kind of like winding down here, Ben. You let me know. Do you want to take another question or two, or do you, like how are you feeling? I know we've gotten a ton of questions thrown at you here, so I just want to be mindful of your time as well.
I'm happy to answer some more if there's anything else. If we're winding down, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or people through MLH. I'm happy to chat more or help any way I can.
Absolutely. I guess this is a good one to kind of cap off on.
Sure.
I'll let you be the judge, but I just think it's always funny to ask this question.
we get that a lot. Yeah, how is Stack Overflow? Or the other popular question we get is, how do you fix Stack Overflow when Stack Overflow's down? Um, yeah, I mean, and that's actually a very flattering question for us. We love that people have Stack Overflow as part of their tool belt, and that they it's such a big part of their development day to day. But yeah, when Stack Overflow is down, like I said, we're users of this community just as much as we are employees. So yeah, it's a tool that's out of our tool belt just like any other when we're not able to access Stack Overflow. Luckily, we have a whole bunch of monitoring and logging to help us tackle challenges when they come up. But yeah, thank you for the question. That is always good to hear.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for your
Thank
time
you all.
today. Thank you so much for answering all of our questions. I'm sure everyone here in the comments will be, you'll see that they're very pleased if you want to take a look at the session later on. But outside of that, once again, thank you so much for your time. We'll be looking forward to kind of going through the challenges throughout the week, and we'll work together also to get you some of those resources that y'all were talking about. Primarily the slideshow as well. So thanks so much. Anything else that you wanted to let the audience know before we went ahead and signed off?
Thank you all. Thank you for the great questions, and good luck with the challenges. Hope you have a great week.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much, Ben. Have a good one.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.